Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this live stream demonstration on portraiture. This goes along with your assignment for this week. It's a week-long study called the Study in Self-Portraiture, and it's meant to be a practice session for your more advanced self-portrait that will be your final project. I'll go into a lot of detail and show a bunch of images, both of professional artists and previous student work for that project, which is called Looking at Looking, next week. And then you'll have all the way up until week 11 to do that project. This is really a chance for you to practice some of the formal concerns that you're going to need to do that project well, including facial proportion in paint, the planes of the face, and color mixing. What I'm going to do today is going to be a fairly simple, really just the first hour of blocking in the features and getting some of the detail that's in there that will hopefully help you see how I get started on a project like this and let you know what your next steps are. Now, I think it's important for me to point out that I myself am not a portrait painter by trade. I can do portraits, but my main practice is much more as a landscape spatial painter and abstract artist. And so I've included several videos on YouTube in our Canvas shell that are by artists who do this for their living and for their trade. And I think some of them are really quite good. One that I was watching this week that I highly recommend you look at uses what's called the Zorn palette. Zorn palette is named after a Swedish painter, and it's a very simplified palette, and you might really like using something like that. What I'll be using today is a more expansive palette, the palette that you've kind of been working with so far. And unfortunately, the way that I have my camera set up, you won't be able to see exactly what I'm doing, but I'll try and describe it as I start to work. You can see that I'm actually painting from a photograph today. That's so that you can see the same thing that I'm seeing. If I was doing this for myself, I would definitely be working from a mirror. I much prefer that. And I might use a camera to help me, double check lighting or double check proportions on a part of my face that I'm struggling with. But the reason that I like live over a camera is because I'm not crazy about the way that the camera simplifies color. And I like to see some of the color tones with my own eyes that allow me to change temperature from warm to cool or value from light to dark. And even just kind of glancing at this photograph, this selfie that I took this morning that I'll be working from, it seems really yellow to me. And I think that that's okay. It'll work just fine for this process, but it's something that I recommend you consider when working on your own. Do you work from a mirror where you can react to what your eyes are perceiving as changes in the light and temperature of your face, or do you work from a photograph? Both are completely acceptable, both for this class and just in general as an artist. There's nothing wrong with working from a photograph. I prefer the skill set that comes with working from life, and I like the kind of liveliness of it as well. So I'm about to get started. I'm just going to dive right in. Please, in the chats, if you have any questions at all about this project, what I'm doing, or anything like that, just throw them in there. You can ask me anything, and as I see them pop up, I'll answer them to the camera. I took about 10 minutes, maybe a little less, and made just a really quick sketch of myself based on that photograph right before I started streaming. This was really just a chance for me to kind of block into my own mind about how this project's going to go. I recommend this. Many of you are probably more comfortable with drawing than you are with painting, and getting yourself kind of in the mode to work on the face by doing something like this, like a pencil sketch really quick, might help you considerably. A couple things that I'll point out right here that might help to kind of see where I'm coming from is I'm noticing, and things I'm going to be looking at as I paint, the planes of the face, these big shapes here. So this whole light side right there, which of course because of my beard is darkened here on the side, but otherwise this plane of the face, if you want to think about it as this kind of section of light on a sphere, light, dark, light, right? So you get this shadow down the center, and that's kind of what's causing all of this. And I'm going to pay attention to any of the points at which that breaks in and gives me like extra details on the planes of the face. That level of simplification is going to be really helpful as you start to work. One of the real tricks to painting or drawing the portrait, or really damn near anything, is to constantly try and simplify. Simplify what you're seeing, simplify what you're doing. So you might see me squint quite a lot as I look up at my computer screen so that I can see that photo. And that's me just softening my eyes a little bit, letting me see kind of big sections of planes of value and temperature of color, as opposed to getting lost in these tiny little details of like particular highlights in my glasses or what have you. Okay, to get started, I'm going to take a little bit of Ivory Black and I'm just going to knock down that backdrop a little bit of white because I don't like how white that is. You guys know I've talked about this a lot. I think that a lot of times students of all shapes and sizes get really bogged down in the white of a canvas, and it winds up really kind of dominating how they see the rest of the painting. They kind of fight against that white constantly, and I'm just going to gray it down a little bit. This is Ivory Black. It's a fairly cool black. In the Zorn palette, this functions as your blue on the primary scale. It's so cool. So now once I kind of block that in, I'm going to take, by the way, I was using a bristle brush. I'll use a lot of bristle brushes here at the start. That's so that I can kind of block in heavy amounts of color relatively quickly and not worry about fine detail. I'll get to fine detail later. Okay. I'm wiping off most of the paint and most of the solvent that I used. That was a heavy solvent amount that I put on there. And I want to knock most of that down. I don't want too much of that to get back into my paint as I start to work, but it's a way to just kind of simplify and unify the canvas as I get started. I'll do the first steps of my color mixing with a palette knife. The reason for that is because I don't want to bog down my brushes too much. What's on my palette knife right now is just straight up cadmium yellow. I'm going to add a lot of white to that and then some pink. If you have pale Caucasian skin tone that you're dealing with like me, you'll notice a lot of pinks and orange. Basically a pinkish orange is going to be your starting point, and then a lot of white. If you have tanner, more olive, darker skin tone, then you're going to have probably more violets, more purples in there, a little bit more blue as you add. And then if you have brown skin, you're going to have obviously brown, but look for those other color temperatures in there. A lot of violet, a lot of pink, a lot of warmth. One of the things that I'll be focusing on showing you when I show you professional work next week will be letting you see some of the like some professionals and how they paint different levels of skin tone, different colors of skin tone, so that you can have some ideas of colors to look for in your own work. For this week, I really recommend that you spend some time not just diving in doing what I'm doing, but spend some time mixing your colors even before you start to paint. Think a little bit about color temperature, color value, and I just want to be clear, you don't have to get colors exactly right in terms of hue, saturation, and value all at the same time in order for them to function nicely in your painting. What you have to do is pay attention to your value consistency between tones. So as I work, one of the things that I'll really be thinking about is how one color, one value next to another affects that color. So in other words, if I start painting the light side of my face, I'm going to be thinking about how light and warm it is compared to the dark shadowed side of my face. And I'll be thinking about that more, honestly, than is this the exact right color that I'm seeing in this photograph. So what I have here is a combination of a lot of titanium white, a fair amount of Cadmium Yellow, and some Napthol Red, which you could function as your Cadmium Red light. And then I've added some Ivory Black into this to just dull it down a little bit. Now, if I want to make that even more significantly dull, the opposite of orange on the color wheel, the complement of orange, is blue. And I have some Ultramarine Blue right here. I'll tap just the tiniest bit into that and get a nice, cooler, grayed down version of that color as well. It's going to have hints of both purple and green in it because there's so much yellow and red in the starting point. But it's primarily going to function like a much more subdued mid-tone, essentially. And I'm starting to kind of block that in. And then for each of these colors, I'm going to take a little extra white. I'll use quite a lot of white today. I'll take a little bit of white and kind of smear those out so that I have some things to start with. Now, I know based on how I've painted in the past when I work quickly on the human figure, that these colors are going to change really quick. I'm going to need more than I have out here, but I want to get started with some blocking in of some things. So I'm going to take a really watered down section of Ivory Black on my bristle brush. It's a wide bristle brush, pretty clunky brush. And I'm just going to kind of do something like this, but really simplified. I'm just going to kind of block in some of the main shapes of my face and kind of think about the overall image on the canvas, and I'll kind of go from there. If you go a little too dark in any areas, you can always wipe it down with your rag again. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and dive in here. I can already see that I want a little bit more color in that tone. As you start to mix, it's really important that you use enough paint. This is a fairly large canvas you're working on, and that I'm working on. I'm working at about life size, so you're gonna need enough, paint mixed up there. And I can already tell I didn't mix enough for this purpose to really be able to block in some heavy areas quickly. Now, what I'm going to try and think of right here at the start is essentially 3 or 4 tones. So like a mid-tone, which is kind of this kind of peachy tone right here. A darker tone, which is this kind of pinkish purpley kind of color here that I will from time to time adjust with a little bit more black or a little bit more blue to cool it off and darken it a little bit. That's going to be my main shadow color. And as I block it in, and I'm again working in multiple brushes as I go, and as I block it in, I will kind of always be thinking a little bit about how it relates to the other colors around it. Now I want to feel some blood in my cheeks and in some of these features, so as I go, I'm going to try and maintain that. Just noticing a couple of things here. All right, so I see a mistake right on, so I'm going to correct it really quick. If you do that, don't worry about it at this stage. You make a mistake like I just did, I basically offset my eyes the wrong direction. So I'm just going to come back in and fix that really quickly. I noticed that my right eye, the eye in the image that's to the right, was too low. And that was going to throw everything off. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of considering that right now and just blocking a little bit more. And that's also going to raise up my nose a touch. So I'm going to wipe this off. It's going to look messy for a minute, but this is going to get much better because of it. If you have to wipe stuff down, if you have to work from that, I really want you guys to get in the habit of thinking about painting just like another form of drawing. There's nothing wrong with taking some paint off and giving it another go, which is exactly what I'm going to do right now. Okay. No harm, no foul. Let's try this one more time. Now at this stage of a painting, I really try and think of myself almost like a sculptor more than a drawer. And what I mean by that is that I'm going to try and kind of carve out the planes, the directions of each section of this rounded form of a face. As it curves around like this, I want to think about each of those left, left middle, middle, right, and how each one of those planes is affected by light and shadow, so that I have some things I can deal with as I start to build things in. And to really try and exaggerate that a little bit to make sure that I don't lose a sense of depth across my forms. The depth is more important at this stage by far than tight little lines or attempts at really strong detail. I'll have plenty of time to do detail after I start to block some of these features in. I'm going to take my slightly grayed down yellow tone over here, and I'm going to add a fair amount of white to it, and I'm just going to see how my light section of my face is going to function against the rest of the forms that I'm laying in right now, and make sure that I've got something I can use. And I think it looks pretty good, so I'm not going to worry too much about messing with it for right now. This is still just a blocking feature. It's going to be really, really useful after I get enough paint on there to start manipulating the rest of the features. Again, as I work, I'm allowing myself to push things around. Kind of finding and feeling my way towards a more detailed portrait. Now, since I have glasses, I have to deal with that sooner than later. And if you yourself wear glasses, or I don't know, it's a little different than if you have like a facial piercing. If you have a facial piercing, you know, an eyebrow ring or nose ring or something like that, I think you can get away with not dealing with that for a while, and then kind of come back in and deal with it later. But glasses change so much of the quality of light and lines around your face, and you really have to kind of focus on them as you go, or you're going to, if you just try and paint yourself without glasses and then put glasses on, draw glasses on at the end, they're just not going to match up to your face and all the shadows that you've been dealing with, and I find that it makes it even harder to work with. So I would rather go ahead and have at least some hints of where the glasses are going to be on there as I go. And I probably won't block them all the way in because I don't want to be kind of married to them yet. I want them to feel as flexible as the rest of this painting right now. So that's probably about all I'll do on those. While I have this kind of dark on my brush here, I might go ahead and throw in a little bit more shadow on my mouth and do a check on that real quick and just see kind of how I'm starting to feel about that. I usually don't mess with the outside of the face, the outside line of the face, for quite a while, because this needs to be related to the mouth and everything else I'm doing with it, so I don't want to focus too much on this just yet. Now, one thing that I notice in my painting is that I kind of like where it's going. There's some good stuff going on in there. You can probably see this in the image that I'm painting from, but notice how the light gets way cooler over here on the right side. I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to use a nice like pale bluish violet over on this side, and I'm hoping that will offset some of these warms, these really strong kind of pinks and red violets that I'm working with right now. So let me see if I can show you the planes across my face as I see them. Okay, I'm having a core of shadow that I'm seeing as a pretty cool, relatively dark space that I'm exaggerating somewhat down the middle of my face, okay? And then I have this pretty nice, kind of warm, but mid-tone for the purposes of this piece. Light side here that functions as the kind of lead up to the highlight across this side of my face right there. And that's what a whole lot is catching. That's what's, the side of my nose here, the side of my upper lip, all the way down to where my beard starts. Notice that at this moment I'm not worrying too much about the distinction between beard color and face color. Part of that's because I'm kind of yellow and pink, and so is my beard. But I'm gonna deal with this later. Right now I'm just thinking about blocking in shape and blocking in value, and trying to get that, something well on its way. And then of course the third value is this little bit cooler, little bit more subdued, and then a fair amount of white. That makes up the light side, starting about here. And you'll notice that I'm trying to keep my brush and the marks that I'm using fairly angular right now. I want them to feel a little chiseled in terms of the sharpness of each move, and almost thinking like I'm kind of painting in almost like a paint by numbers, I guess you might say. And that's because I don't want to get too bogged down yet in concerns that are based in blending, in modeling from one form to the next. Instead, what I'm really trying to do is get some of these places in the right spots, and then I'll deal with them as I go. Slightly different color I'm using here for the outside edges of my beard. I just warmed it up a little bit with a little bit of yellow ochre. This is the same violet that is in the rest of the space. I just added a little yellow ochre. Remember, yellow is the opposite of violet, so since I had a little bit of violet already going on there, this both warms it up and doesn't change its value a whole lot. So there's a distinction between value and temperature, and I'm trying to find that distinction right here. Block in a couple of little differences in value. Now, one other thing I want to point out, do you see how much the gray tone underneath that initial smear of ivory black is doing for the painting for me right now? It's really making a big difference in getting me some shifts in value. I don't have to figure out all of these little areas because the gray is holding a value tone that isn't pure white. And that allows me to work on top of it much more easily. Now here's a space that you might need to measure. I often need to measure this distance from basically the outside of my eye to my ear. So getting a little measurement of that and deciding how wide that actually is. And I'm seeing it as about that wide, so that means that need to be careful not to let my face go too wide this direction. And you can kind of see what I'm thinking of there. A little bit more of this yellow. And that's going to put my ear kind of rising right up. Now in your earlier classes, painting one or drawing one perhaps, you probably spent some time working on the proportional features of the face. Just a quick reminder of some of those now. The kind of rule of thumb, and you need to measure this on yourself and make sure that it's not totally wrong, but the kind of rule of thumb is that your eye line is midway between your chin and the top of your head, not the top of your forehead. which of course on me is almost the same thing. But midway between that is your eye line. Then midway between your eye line and your chin is your mouth. And midway between your eye line and your mouth is your nose. Now, of course, there's a lot of variation inside of that, but that's a good rule of thumb. Your ear, the top of your ear, if your head is straight, which mine is not exactly in this photo, but if your head is straight, is about midway between, lies between the top of your eye line and about your nose. So it's in this zone right here. And you can kind of see that blocked in okay on mine. Now, I'm not going to do a whole lot of work on that right at this second. I'm just trying to get some things in place for me to start working. Okay, this is a zone where I think it'll actually be useful for me to go ahead and find that light, cool tone that I need on the other side of my face. So I'm going to grab some white. I know I need it to be pretty light. And I'm going to start with a touch of blue and make sure that I keep it on the cool side this time. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of my kind of skin tone that I have mixed up, this like kind of orangish yellow as a starting point. And I'm going to mix a fair amount of it. Let's see how this holds up. This should be lighter and cooler than the forms right around it. And this is going to be kind of a fourth tone. So we have 1, 2, 3, and then this will be this fourth one that I'm going to use on this side of my face. I'm going to try and block it in fairly heavily, make sure I kind of see where that's coming from. And the reason I needed this soon was because of the lights on the side of my nose. Now I want to point out one thing that I haven't mentioned at all today, and that is the word realism or realistic. I think this is a highly overused and frankly overrated word in painting. I can't think of very many paintings that I'm interested in that are actually realistic. Now, some of this might be an issue of vocab and, you know, a variation of like what we mean by realistic. I think most people, when they say realistic, mean photorealistic. And that means looking like a photograph, okay? And there are a handful of artists throughout art history and through the photorealistic movement that I feel strongly about in regards to that method of working. But there are more that I am way more interested in whose work does not look at all like a photograph. And in fact looks quite a bit like a painting. That's what I'm looking for when I look at a painting, is a painting that looks like a painting. And so that's what I'm trying to find. And with that in mind, I would personally rather not have a painting that looks, you know, photorealistic. Now, that's not to say that it's not based in any way on representation or what I'm seeing in the real world. It doesn't have to shift all the way towards, you know, excessive abstraction or cubism or something like that for me to be interested in it. It just needs to, in my opinion, have some forms that are based in painting, for lack of a better term. Okay, I'm fairly happy with where I've got this built to right now, and I'm going to start trying to get a little bit more variation and effort into getting these tones a little closer to what I'm seeing. So I'm going to start focusing a little bit more here and there on the more subtle moves across some of these forms, and I'll try and continue to build them up as I go, and hopefully it'll help you kind of see where I'm heading as I work. Now, one thing that's a little tricky in this video is, of course, that you're looking at my canvas angled pretty strongly. So there's kind of what it should look like, or closer to your camera view, but because it's on an easel, you're seeing it kind of tilted away from me. So, of course, when I'm done with the demo, I will put a little bit of effort into it and then post it on our demo board. You notice I haven't shifted yet to a tighter brush, to a nylon. I'm still using a Bristle, which is pretty clunky. I'm just enjoying what that's doing to the quality of the paint as I'm applying it right now. And so I'm not worried too much about changing that just yet. I will probably deal with that as I work a little bit more. So some of the things I'm focusing on as I get a little bit more detailed and I'm looking a little closer is I'm trying to get a little bit more attention on some of the shifts in value and temperature inside this eye. So where I see a little bit of darkness and coolness, I'm going to focus on that. Where I see something warm up, like this little section right here underneath my eyelid. And you notice I'm not putting any attention yet onto like phrases that we use to tell ourselves, like the whites of the eye, right? Like everybody, you know, uses this term to mean like that the side of your eye is white. Well, you can see in this photograph that you know, this part of my eye is not even, you know, the lightest part of that section of my face other than the highlight on it. You know, this side over here is much lighter. So I'm not worried about that just yet. What I am worried about is getting things in the right place and maintaining that feel of roundness, of depth across this almost sculptural face. I'm also, by the way, not thinking very much about how much it does or does not look like me. What I'm doing right now is really just about the same thing I would do if I was painting you. I'm just trying to block things in, think about them in terms of I want it to look like a human. Human first, individual person second, right? And I'll kind of worry about the details on that as I go. Of course, can all hear my cat come in. She's very proud of herself. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and kind of step back for a second and try and get a little bit more of the big features of the overall painting done. And this is so that, you know, I've been painting for about 40 minutes, and I'm only going to work for another 20 or 25, maybe 30, depending on how I'm feeling, in front of the camera. And so I want you all to start to kind of see some of the things that I might be taking a little bit for granted. And that's going to include some of the negative space. So I'm going to go ahead and darken in these things. This might not be something I would normally do at this stage, but I want you all to kind of see where the piece is going. This is mostly ivory black, but I'm not trying to force it to be pure black, because I think pure black would look way too strong on this right now. So I'm letting the kind of gray and skin tone that's in the brush and that's on the palette mix into that a little bit, which is lightening it and warming it up a little bit from the tone of pure Ivory Black. And that's going to help to make it just not feel quite so cutting out the form. Now, when you've got this much goop on your brush, this is when you can accidentally like drip some onto your painting if you're not careful. If that happens, you know, I kind of like happy mistakes like that. They sometimes get me out of my, like I can really, my biggest mistakes happen if I stay too locked in to detail too soon and spend all of my time trying to get this thing like exactly right. And I get like a really, you know, what I think looks like a great eye, for instance. Oh, that eye looks really good. I'm glad I spent some time on that. And then I scoot back and I realize that the eye's in the, you know, the frickin' wrong place or something. Like I started to do at the beginning of this video, actually. You know, and that drives me way crazier than like a mistake, like a drip of paint falling off of my brush and hitting the middle of the canvas. Like I can fix that pretty quickly. That's no big deal. Okay, so now that there's like a little bit more, and again, man, every time I glance at the image that you guys are looking at, it looks so warped. This is what I'm seeing. So you can kind of start to kind of see how that's going a little bit better. And yeah, you know, I feel okay about this. It's not, you know, it's coming along a little bit at a time, right? I like to use softer lines at edges while working so that I have, you know, some flexibility of vision to kind of correct as I need to. Some of the things that you're going to realize as you work on these pieces this week is, and that I want you to start, you know, getting the hang of as you mix more color, is the ways in which color impacts other mixes. So for instance, I'm mixing a fair amount of yellow ochre into my brush right now. That's darker than these tones that I have here. But it's lighter than the black that was just in my brush. So it does this interesting thing where it kind of splits the difference. It lightens the tone that was just in my brush, and then when I apply it, it's actually, you know, darker than some of the forms right around it. And this is just me trying to get a little bit of kind of a hint of where the beard is coming in. Still being pretty clunky with it. And you notice one thing I'm definitely not doing at all is like painting eyelashes or like individual strands of beard. Like if this painting ever gets to that level of refinement, it'll be a long time from now. It'll be, you know, after a lot more work has been put into checking and rechecking all the things that I've got going on in the rest of this position. And then maybe, you know, maybe, there's nothing wrong with that level of detail. I just want you to work up to it. I don't want you to get there a little too quickly because you might be totally missing out on something that you should have been paying attention to. And because of that, because I'm not spending a whole lot of time doing much blending, this probably has a little bit of a paint by numbers feel to it to you. You know, you're probably thinking like, oh, this looks a little a little flat by comparison. And I'm okay with that at this stage still. I want to eventually be able to come in and get some detail across some forms that I'm happy with. And I'll kind of show you a little bit of what that might look like here on the nose real quick. Now this is a space where you're going to want to have had, as you start to work detail back into your previous form, it's important that you had enough paint on the surface to begin with, or else you're going to find it difficult to have much to push around after that. You guys are being pretty quiet today. Not seeing a lot of questions come in. That's fine. But if you have any, this is a pretty good time to ask them as we start to shift towards saying goodbye for class. And I'll keep painting along on this guy and hopefully give you a little bit of clarification of where it is. I'll also post some photos of it that'll be a little easier to see some of the subtlety that the camera, that my webcam may not be picking up. Let me ask it this way. Are there any things that you're worried about being able to paint in this? A facial feature? Are you worried about the nose? Are you worried about an ear or something like that? We can talk about that a little bit. But I will say the best advice I can give you at the start is to simplify, to think about the shapes of value more than you think about what it is you're painting. I'm not thinking of this as a nose. I'm thinking of it as each of these little, at first I was thinking of it almost like a pyramid. Left side, front side, right side. And now I'm seeing all these little subtle variations as it builds around a nostril, around the bulbous part of my nose. And now I'm seeing some, distinctive, things that I want to paint in there that are important to me to get as I work across. But at the start, it was so much more simple than that. You notice too that I skip around a fair amount as I work. I try and stay with my eyes on the big picture. I don't want to focus too much on any one thing just yet. I want to make sure that I'm always kind of checking back in with what it is I'm seeing. I will say that I have already received a question about this project this week as to whether or not you can be, kind of fantastical in your depiction of yourself. Can you change something? Can you give yourself wings or horns or something? Great, it's fine. It's all fine with me. But remember that this week is meant to be a study for what, in my opinion, will be a more important self-portrait later in the term. To finish out the term, and that portrait that you do then will really be about trying to show me something about who you are as much as what you look like. So this week is really about practice. It's about trying your best to make it look like you, to make it look like a person, to get the color, if that's what you're focusing on, or the value as close to correct as you can. And I don't mind if you add, kind of augment that, but I don't want you to use, exaggeration as an excuse for yourself, so that you're like, well, yeah, it doesn't really look like me, or the color's totally wrong. But that was because I didn't, I was trying to make myself look like a spider or whatever. Like that's great. Like there's room for that. There will be even more room for that later on. But for right now, I really want you to, do your best to try and practice this method, this a little bit more kind of traditional way of blocking in, and figure out for yourself how this works for you. Does it help you? It will help you. It'll help you as a color mixer for sure. You'll be a better color mixer if you try this method for a little while. And that's what I want. That's what you want too, I think. So you can see I'm still pushing things around. I mean, shoot, I'm moving the eye around inside the glasses. I'm moving the glasses around the eye as I work. I'm not beholden to anything still, even after an hour of painting. I'm probably not going to scrape the whole thing down and start again, but I still have no problem, manipulating position at this point because, I'm moving fairly quickly and I'm moving fairly in a clunky manner, and those things mean that I have to be able to adjust. And as I want to start to blend, I'll let myself do that. I don't have a problem with blending at all. There's going to be a time when it's going to be necessary, depending on how much naturalism I want to work into this image. And I love blends. I just am not messing with them too much right now. I'm enjoying the way that the paint is kind of stacking up on the surface a little bit now, and the ways in which some of the forms I'm getting are kind of starting to pop and do some cool things. I'm still at this moment kind of ignoring the actual true highlights, the brightest spots, because I want those to sit on there last. I don't want to fight them as I work just yet. So one artist that I would recommend everyone look at for this method is a British artist who died in the early 1980s named Euan Uglow. Uglow is a great, I'll jot it down in the comments below this video, but Uglow is a great example of a guy who worked in blocked color and measurement in order to create some really remarkable paintings that wound up actually, for all their studiousness, and they really quite personal, and you can feel so much in them about who the artist was and how he saw the world. He said crazy things like, "No one has ever looked at you as intensely as I have," stuff like that. And when you see his paintings, you'll see what he meant. He just had a startling level of kind of intensity of focus. And all right, let me block in a little bit of this other eye over here. And that might be good for today's demo. I'll do some more work on it and post. You know, I like to keep these videos to not a whole lot over an hour, and we're coming up on that now. So I hope that you will ask me advice on your work, that you will post in our discussion board this week. That kind of fell off last week. As you work, you know, if you run into snags, you hit something that's a little challenging to you, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. You know, hey Grant, I'm struggling with this. Take a look at my image, take a look at what I'm painting, and help me out. Happy to do it. It's my job. Okay, again, one more time, I'll just show you kind of what I'm actually seeing, some of the angles of it. You know, I'll probably mess with the glasses a little bit. I think they're a little off over here. You know, I think this needs to be dropped down a little bit and squared off. And I'll probably push that around a little bit between what you're seeing now and what you'll see when I post later this afternoon. So what I've got here is honestly mostly ivory black and yellow ochre on my brush. It's a really green, gray. And the reason I'm starting with this is because I want to have a little bit of color shift in this little section right here. And so I'm going to do that with temperature and value by blocking in a little bit of a cooler, because it's green, tone into that space. Then I will grab a little bit of that kind of cool violet that I'd been playing with earlier. It's got a lot more blue in it. And this hopefully will function nicely next to it. the reason this spot is taking me quite a while is because I'm trying to make pretty subtle distinctions between value, kind of more notations for myself than anything else. I'm trying to get the temperature to be both warm and cool in certain spots, and then I'm also trying to get it to lighten and darken in certain spots. And that's, that's taken a minute, because as I put it on there, it looks really different on my canvas than it does on my palette. So I'm like, oh, I think that's it, and then I put it up there like, nope, not quite. And so I want to push and pull it until I get it to the spot that I'm really looking for. And it's hard. This is about color relativity, really. When you're trying to get something to look right on the canvas, it has a lot to do, it has a lot to do with all the colors that you've already got on there, all the colors that are around it, as much as the color that you've just mixed. You've just mixed this color and it looks exactly right, and then you get it up on the canvas and it's not quite there, and you have to be willing to kind of push it around a touch here and there. And so hopefully you can kind of see the method that I'm working in as I kind of try and see the shadow that's being cast by my glasses. That's what all this purple is right here. You've got this really strong shadow right here that's bouncing, and that's light passing through the lens of my glasses that's creating some of that. And so I have to kind of pay attention to that as I work and not ignore it. And that's what's cooling it down and making it so kind of purple over there. But then you've got these warm tones that pop back into the side over here, and you got to account for that as well. So just as you work, check in with yourself. Make sure that you're actually paying attention to some of the tones that you're setting up, and that you're not just kind of painting accidentally. You don't want to just be kind of stumbling around in the dark. You want to feel like you've got a sense of, okay, is that right? If it's not right, let's fix it. I'd much rather see you pushing that around and see lots of correctional points in there as you go than see a really tightly rendered but wrong in terms of shape, value, texture, color, form as you go. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do before I let you guys go is I'm just going to kind of get a quick measurement, and I'm going to drop these glasses down a little lower. About there. And then I'm going to block in a tone that I like a little bit more for that. Let's do it. All right. Okay, I feel like we're getting, pretty close for today. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up there. Here's what we're looking at so far. And like I said, I know it's very blocky. It's very carved out and kind of paint by numbersy. I don't mind some of that. It's always going to have a little bit of that in my estimation for this project, for myself. But I will try and get a little bit more definition and firmed up images, or firmed up features as I work. So just kind of quickly, this is kind of what I was looking at and where I'm at now. And so you can see that I'm kind of starting to get some of the right forms in there. There's still a lot to be done. This section right here needs to be lighter. The beard needs to be a little bit better defined. I want to focus on the eyes a little bit more because that's going to be an important part of the overall image. I want some of these to soften at some of the edges and have a little bit more variation points in here. But all in all, this is an acceptable position to be working from. And yeah, that's that. I will post a photo of it updated in a few hours. You'll be able to watch this video shortly this afternoon. And good luck on your self-portraits. Let me know if you run into any snags. And thanks very much for watching. Have a good one.